Hello, welcome to this new Tech Captain episode. So today we are lucky to have Matthew Whitworth with us. Hi, Matthew.
Hi, guys.
And if I'm not mistaken, so you've had a bachelor degree in computing. You worked mostly in finance until you became CTO of Tallarium today. But a more interesting bit, I will ask you a bit later, is about the operating system you spent 5 years working on.
Sure.
Which seems very, very interesting. But and as usual, I'm joined with Gareth, who will be joining this discussion.
Hi, Matthew. Hi, everyone.
So, Matthew, I mean, let's go into it. Like, tell us more about this operating system.
Sure. So I think this was more of a project, kind of bedroom style thing at home, really. What the idea was let's see how far I can get, which is usually a good operating principle for most things that you want to do, especially those that seem quite challenging. So really you start with writing the bootloader, and if you can get to that stage, that's already quite a few problems solved. And then it was really just a case of bringing up the kernel, bringing up some services. Oh, can it do this? Well, it's not too much of a difficulty to add this functionality. Oh, it's got a shell now. And then it's this sort of steps. It's almost in some ways the perfect kind of set of steps, really. This sort of feedback, this iteration that we all like, this yes, I've done it type approach. I think that was the kind of thing that really kept me going for quite a long time there. And a couple of hours in every other evening or so. It was quite a big project over a number of years. It lives somewhere on GitHub now. I haven't touched it for a very long time, but it's still good to look back and see what I was like back there as well.
It's interesting. What language did you use to write it?
So it was assembly for the bootloader, because you have to stuff everything into 512 bytes, and then C for that. And I had the approach, I think, at some point to try and port Mono, which is the C# runtime, the open source one, and get that running. And I felt like, okay, if I'm writing in such a high level language there, then I can really forget all the other pain and misery that comes with writing in a low level language for quite a long time as well.
Everything is easy after.
Certainly it forces you to check everything at least 5 times.
I was going to say, I actually I did assembly many moons ago, and I really loved it, and I still miss the simplicity of it, to be honest with you.
I think it promotes a certain rigor of thought. It's this idea of you can't just sort of write something and then hope it'll be accepted. You really have to think about every stage, about every memory location you're referencing, etc. as well. So I think that's what working in an environment with a lot of constraints does. It just makes you a better thinker as a result.
I was looking at something today, and it was I've always had an interest in Forth for some reason. And a guy had written he'd written a custom CPU in discrete logic to run a Forth compiler interpreter, a whole in Forth environment. I thought how extraordinary that was. People do crazy stuff in this area, don't they? Really?
That's right, and I think it's that kind of if people are working right at the base, and I think in computing, to me, it's operating systems and its language environments. Like the Forth example you just mentioned, it's all those stories of this guy wrote X in a weekend, and it always seems to come back down to those subjects as well.
And can you tell us more about your role now at Tallarium? I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. It's a company that's been there for a few years, raised a bit of money. I think you guys are like 15, 20 people now. So can you tell us more about this?
Yeah, of course. So really the core concept is the fact that traders in the energy markets receive a lot of data, not via exchanges like you might typically have, say, in equities, stocks and shares, etc. It's more about a brokered market. So these guys will get lots of quotes from their favorite brokers over chat messages. So Yahoo Messenger essentially ran the world commodity markets for a long time. When Yahoo retired it, things sort of scattered into different chat provider systems as well. So that was definitely our core business for a long time, of transforming the raw chat messages that people would get essentially into numbers on a screen, something where you could look at the average forward curve. What what's the price for propane in, say, February next year, and just look at it and know it straight away as well. So we really focused on handling that because that's the core market data that this environment operates under. And we're doing some pretty cool things with voice recognition, because just as these guys get lots of chatter, they also have these voice boxes that have tons and tons of calls going over them. It's almost impossible to keep up with all the information that they're getting, and just doing that is just a huge mental load that means they're not really able to operate and kind of figure out what the true value is, identify trading opportunities, etc. So business-wise, I found that a really attractive proposition, and it's kind of hard to believe that things still operate in this way in the year 2023, but hopefully we can do something about that.
So are you doing something real time with the voice then?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's close to real time, but it's a sense of once this voice recording finishes, it gets uploaded, we process it. There's a lot of specialist language. I kind of like to use the analogy of a cattle auction, this sort of sense of English with all the extraneous words stripped out, and really in about the 3 or 4 second window that these brokers have, they're able to transmit what the price is, what the period is, and what the product is pretty quickly. So trying to actually find a voice recognition engine or providers actually that were happy to work with us based on that was quite a challenge to begin with, because everybody's really interested in, say, courtroom transcriptions. If people use a particularly sort of easy to understand formal English, and it's very, very far away from the kind of specialist lingo that these guys end up
And
using.
who are your clients?
Household names, the biggest super majors, energy trading companies in the world. So they're all interested in that because they know that they get a ton of data, and pretty much, especially in the classic example here is voice calls. As soon as that voice call is finished, that information which the company could use just disappears into the ether.
Yeah. And what it feels like, your timing is perfect as well with everything going on, right? Energy trading.
That's right. I mean, I'd often hope that energy is sort of out of the news a little less, but that I'd be able to focus on some other things. But it seems like every day there's something new to do with the structure of how energy is traded around the world, and more broadly commodities as well. That's something humans have been doing for thousands of years, and will no doubt continue to do more of.
Given the audience we have at Tech Captains, maybe you can tell us more about the tech stack you have for all of that.
Yeah, of course. So really the back end is an Elixir, and that's a environment that we're very much big fans of. The idea is that the thinking around a lot of conventional architectural approaches is let's have a monolithic backend, and when it gets too big, let's split it out into a whole set of microservices. Elixir, Erlang, and everything based on the Beam VM is very much about message passing. So you still get this sense of having a kind of set of services. Really, in Elixir, they're gen servers, but you're passing messages between them, but you don't have all the problems that a very distributed microservice-based approach does around testing and deployment and things like that. And what we found is keep it monolithic, but monolithic doesn't mean poor design, bad design. It's more about does the environment that you're using, the language you're using, promote good design practices? And hey, when it makes sense, we can pull a service out, put it on another machine, and it's so long as it joins that same cluster. To me, that's the beauty of Erlang. It looks like it's running locally there as well.
Yeah, so I was, because I didn't know much about it. I mean, I knew what Erlang was because that's been around for, I think, since the 80s, right? It's pretty old. It's like Ericsson who developed it originally.
Quite right.
Yeah, so I didn't know much about Elixir. It was kind of interesting reading up on it, and they were saying obviously you can have thousands of these processes and these threads running that can communicate with each other. How does that work then when you're running in a containerized environment? Does the framework handle that for you? How does that sort of work?
So you lose some of the coolest aspects of it. I mean, things like hot code reloading, and of course that's the basis in the whole public switch telephone network. When's the last time you picked up the phone and the dial tone didn't ring? I suppose that's a rather older example now, but it's this sense of everything else does work though, because really what's happening is it's a distributed cluster, and so long as the nodes can discover each other, then you're kind of good to go. So for example, and there's multiple ways of assembling that cluster, DNS entries, etc. But if you can get that going, then you can really scale horizontally as aggressively as you want, not just vertically on the same machine.
And I was reading as well, there were people just going crazy about how good the tooling was for Elixir. They said, I mean, I just read a few things. It's like, sounds pretty amazing, actually.
Yeah, I have to say, to point out one technology that I've been a big fan of is Phoenix Live View. And it resurrects that old idea of, well, can we have a dumb client and have all the logic and the display things display logic, take place on the back end, and then the front end is only just processing DOM updates, and that's kind of it. So if you want a whole bunch of examples about various games, etc., where everything functionality-wise is running on the back end, Phoenix Live View is the way to go. So all of our internal tooling is written in that, and that makes it like a joy to write and use. It doesn't feel like labor. It feels like you can get something useful going in, say, half an hour or so for any other functionality that we would want to maintain.
And to do all that, given the size of the company, like, are you, I suppose, a very hands-on CTO?
Yeah, I think I'm still very much the everyday coder type as well. So it's this sense of, I think, being involved in every project, and I have 6, 7 people that report to me, but I feel like I'd be remiss if I wasn't up to date on what we were trying to achieve in each one as well. It's not that I sort of like to be overbearing, it's great to have somebody else who doesn't know the details, but can certainly give an opinion on the what.
And how do you manage the context switch? Because I mean, I'm a bit in the same position as you. Like, my company is about the same size, maybe a few more people, and I also spend a good chunk of my time programming while doing all the other admin managerial tasks. And it's not always easy to focus on something for a while deeply in the codes while you have all these other demands coming from all sides.
That's a good question. I would say it's about great note taking. I think there's a lot of, when you have to think about so many things at once, of course, that just builds the anxiety levels in general. I think everybody is sort of prone to that. But if you know that you can get stuff out of your head onto paper and you can find it later and retrieve it, that's the kind of way I've always worked, and I've trusted myself that I'll be able to get that context back. And then just lots of practice, I suppose, when it comes to that as well.
Yeah. And just going back to what you were just talking about, though, with this sort of terminal view, it just reminded me of the thing that's constant in tech, right? Everything is, well, as the Americans say, cyclical, right? All these sort of things go back, and now we have server-side rendering, and we have all these kind of things. So it's kind of everything we just seem to go back to technologies that we had 20, 30 years ago, and we rehash them and bring them forward, don't we, really? It's interesting.
That's right. Remote procedure calls are now microservices, and hey, isn't the word microservice cool?
Yeah, and then there's people even going back to monoliths too. I read something the other day. There's someone that abandoned Micro and they built a monolith again. It's like, yeah.
It helps to be countercultural, I think, a lot of the time.
So you've got, I'm guessing, some kind of real-time dashboards and all the rest of it. Have you built those yourselves? And the reason I ask that is that it seems to be that whole area of these sort of dashboards, that's almost become a commodity now, with things like QuickSight and Looker and Tableau and all of these things. So have you gone that route, or have you built this all? This is all stuff that you've built yourself?
That's a really interesting thing. I mean, for us, we built, it's a kind of a roll your own attempt with TypeScript and Ember, and Ember being sort of third to React and others these days. So I would say it's a sense of there are definitely good patterns to use, and I think this is the case in something like Live View. There are really good UI components, and really every terminal interface, and terminal as our primary product, is a sense of assembling all those different components together, plugging in this data source, and it's that whole model of reactivity to change data that just needs to work as well. So we never actually thought incredibly deeply about it, but there are certain elements that we could replace with that. And there's things like the charting, and we also have this quote feed, which is just a linear history of quotes. I look at it and go, there isn't anything particularly unique to us about it. But I think what we're doing as a company really is shifting from being a terminal first company, how many terminals can we shift to others, to being a data first company. So we're starting to see the value in that number, the aggregated number that we produce, which is another one of the features that we're building, that's the kind of quality that people want to see, and they might just see in some other risk system. I mean, not to bore people, but there are plenty of risk management systems in finance, and people see numbers in those.
Yeah, and in building all of this, is latency something you spend a lot of time thinking about? Because I know that, you look at people trading. I mean, there's famous stories like the Michael Lewis book, I think, was talking about the guys that were building dedicated fiber in a race to get, trading advantages in New York. I can't remember what the name of the book was he wrote. It was really good. But is that something you think about?
It was called Flash Boys, and I remember it because obsessing about low latency is something in my previous job, let's say. I guess maybe it's a relief I don't have to focus on it too much because, of course, the whole market is not very electronically driven. But I do remember the days of, trying to optimize things so that the thread ran dedicated on a single CPU, that, we were making sure that we were getting the lowest latency order entry to the exchanges and all the other FPGA technologies that come with that. That was a really cool thing, but the 2010s were definitely a time of change for that particular industry. And once you get microwave links, it's kind of played out. How much further can you go? The speed of light is the obvious.
And there's speaking of books, Matt, like there's a book, like we have a tradition of every guest recommending a book they really liked, and for you, I think it was Turn the Ship Around from David Marquet.
That's right, yeah. So that was a recommendation from someone else. Tallarium, I read it because there's this sense, especially in larger companies, where you'll hire really smart people, but then you don't really give them the autonomy or independence to grow. I've always been kind of conscious of that because there are very good thinkers, and after a while, professional software development is much less about the how and it's much more about the what. That's what people end up working on, and how they end up doing it. Those are the two things that matter. So although his example is about a US submarine, it just happened to be the worst in the class, and it was a joke to the rest of the US Navy. It was this sense of, well, it's still an organization of people, regardless of what we do. How can I turn it from this attitude of I just do what they tell me to they actually have good ideas that are on track that get accepted by the crew of this submarine as well. So it was a book written quite a few years ago, but I still think it holds kind of timeless lessons there.
Yeah, and the other thing I was interested in, you've got I saw a blog or some article. It was mentioning Tallarium University. Can you talk about what that is?
That's just a sort of internal thing. I mean, one of the interesting things that we have is such a tough and frankly weird field that we operate in as well. So if people want to know the various terms that we use, and maybe this is kind of a shared topic of discussion, how do you get people up to speed in the domain really quickly? It's that kind of structure of active learning, of having those slides available to use and things like that. It's easy to go very far in a startup and then think, okay, well, how do new joiners actually get familiar with the lingo, etc.? This is something that's a very pressing matter for us because there's no way that you can read most of this stuff in even publicly available books. It just doesn't get documented.
Oh, okay, so it's basically it's a way that you onboard or bring on new people onto your team or whatever. Really, it's okay.
I have a last question for you to end this podcast, Matt. Is that do you have any advice for anybody starting in the tech world? I see you've also worked a bit at Bloomberg, which is a very large company, obviously. Working in a small company. Like, how do you compare? What do you recommend to people about the different technologies or the size of companies, anything?
I think a lot of it's about being a better thinker, being a more rigorous thinker, and if you can communicate those kind of complex ideas well, it doesn't really matter what you're working on, even in software. It's all about how can you think further into the future in terms of strategy. So I'd say that that's kind of one piece of advice, which is don't focus on the technology, focus on the process, focus on the thought. In terms of any other advice, I would say don't follow the trends. I've been very counter-cyclical for a very long time, and I think I've kind of enjoyed what I've done, and I've not really cared if anybody else has thought I've enjoyed it as well. So
that's interesting what you said, because I think in tech we always struggle with, well, in any industry, how do you interview people? How do you find the best people? Interviewing is hard. I don't think there is a perfect process. But one of the things I've always done, I say to people, is that for when you're hiring engineers, it's about how do they solve problems? How do you think through and solve a problem, which is, I think, to your point, right?
that's right. And it's taking it away from this very, as we all know, the whiteboard style interview. It's this collaborative approach. Really, the key question to ask is, would I be put off trying to get something done with this guy or not? So when we interview, it tends to be in a very, hey, this is you and me. It's not you versus me approach there. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think it is a collaborative thing, because it's also, we actually did a podcast yesterday, and the person we were talking to there was saying how important it was for you as a candidate to qualify the company. Are they going to have the right culture for you, right? So I think to your point, interviews now are much less sort of combative, us versus them. It's about trying to understand each other, right, really well. Is this the right business for you? Is this the right cultural fit for you? And it's changed quite a bit. I think the interview process has changed a lot, actually. So yeah. So actually, a final question then related to this. Sorry, you were talking about young techies. Then, so the obvious thing is, what do you think about Chat GPT and how that might change what people might decide to study and do when they come out of university, perhaps?
That's a good question. I think there's a lot of hype around it, and it's that classic model of technology adoption. Fundamentally, those large language models aren't going to tend towards truth. They're really good at composing songs or poems about your dog, but fundamentally they need a lot of work and a lot more basis to make sense. Saying that, I'm a huge fan of Copilot, and I think there's a lot of context in software development. And so I think there'll be specialist fields where it will have takeoff immediately. If I'm referencing A, B, and I'm about to do something with C, it can kind of work out that A and B are involved. But good luck in low context environments where you can't make those.
You're talking
inferences.
about GitHub Copilot, right?
That's right, yeah.
Does your team use that? Everyone uses that where you are now, do they?
Yeah, even the holdouts, and I think the idea of Copilot X being able to sort of chat there, it becomes less of a, I suppose, again, the you versus me type thing. It's more of a collaborative conversation there, but you're feeding context to the other person. So I can definitely see that being a big factor in 2023 and 2024. I think we're just at the start of that. That's what gets me excited about LLMs like ChatGPT. I don't believe the wider hype.
Perfect. Well, I guess on this note of excitement, we will finish here today. Thank you so much, Matt, for your time and speaking to us today.
Great. Thanks to you both.
Thanks, Matt. Very nice to meet you.
Perfect. Thank you. Bye-bye. See you everyone in 2 weeks.
Bye-bye.